belong to a number of professional organizations. I'm a certified education planner, which means I've gone through a whole testing process and continued education process. And I'm continually networking and staying on top of all the latest trends. Plus, I get to go visit colleges. So this year, by the end of June, I will have been to over 30 colleges in 5 different states. So it's kind of exciting. Just got back from a trip to Florida, and the month before that I was in Tennessee. And in June, I'm going to be in the Northeast seeing some schools out there. So anyway, that's enough about me. What I want to do is find out more about you guys. How many of you are juniors or parents of juniors? Great. And sophomores? Okay. Freshmen? Any freshmen? All right. So it's not too soon to get started for sure for freshmen. What I want to do is talk a little bit about how do you try and put together the list of colleges, and if that's the most challenging part, because there are over 4,000 colleges out there, and it probably feels like there's even more than that in terms of how many show up in your email box every day, or your mailbox. Yep. The other thing that's kind of a challenge for those of us from the Northwest is that the majority of the schools are not around here. So you can see that there are a lot of them over here on the whole eastern seaboard. And then some in the Midwest, especially the Ohio, Illinois, Iowa area. And not that many until you come over here to the West Coast. I think that is a good visual for you to take a look at, just to kind of understand why there can be schools that you might consider that are far away. So where do you start? A lot of times, people are going to start out by asking you questions. You'll see these surveys and they'll say, well, do you want to go to a big school or a small school? Do you want rural or urban? Do you want to be, what part of the country do you want to be in? Do you want a prestigious name? These are not necessarily the right questions to get started with. So let me explain. Big school versus small school. A lot of times students will tell me, almost every student tells me, I want to go to a school that's bigger than my high school. But when it's a college, even if it's the same size as your high school, it has a very, very different feel. When you're in high school, and my own daughter went to Ingram High School, so she knows about this. She said to me one day she wanted to figure out how many kids did she really go to school with. So she showed up at her first period class and she counted all the kids. Then she went to her next period and she counted the kids who hadn't been in her first period class. And then she went to her next period and counted the kids who hadn't been in the first or second period class. By the time she got to the end of the day, she had come up with 100 students. And she figured out that even though Ingram has 1,300 kids, she was only going to school with 100. When you go to college, you're likely to be going to college with all 1,300 kids, because you might have a senior in your freshman biology class, or you might be a freshman taking an advanced class with a senior, which one of my other daughters did. So it's like, there's, you just never know. Also, a lot of times students think that they want a big school because they want the big rah-rah, and they want to go watch the football games. But it can be harder at a big school to get to know your professors, especially if there are 5, 6, 7, 800 students in some of those classes. Some schools, especially down in Florida and also at UC Berkeley, they do this a lot, where they will put the class online. It's not technically an online class, but they don't have enough seats in the auditorium for all the students. So if you don't want to fight for a seat, they say just watch it online. And it's kind of a crazy way to be thinking about college if, part of the goal is to get to know your professors. The rural versus urban. Our kids are from Seattle. The kids that I work with tend to be either from Seattle or the suburbs, sometimes a little bit further away, but usually they're city kids. And they will almost always say, oh no, I need the excitement of the city. But guess what? When you go to a school in a city, the energy goes out. So on the weekends, there is less likely to be a lot of activities going on your campus. One of the big problems with kids who go to school in some of the big cities, especially, this happens a lot in California, is that the students go home on the weekends. A lot of students live within a driving distance of their campus, and the family culture is that they want them to go home on Saturdays and Sundays. So the campus empties out. Also, you might have schools like schools that are in New York, NYU and Fordham both have this happen, where instead of kids going to parties on the weekend, house parties or whatever, they're taking their fake ID and they're going out clubbing. So it really forms a different energy. And I've had a couple of kids that have faced this in different ways. I had a girl last year who, when she was putting together her college list, she said she definitely did not want a school in a city because her sister went to Fordham and every weekend they went to Manhattan. She said, I want a school which is a college campus where things are happening on the campus, and that's where I'm gonna find my fun. So she ended up going to University of Miami, or Miami University of Ohio, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it's got a lot of activities going on the weekends. Another student was at NYU, and he came to me and said, I think I need to transfer. He said, I'm not happy, there's not enough school spirit and community. So he ended up transferring to a school that was 5 hours from a big city. He loves it. He's having a great time. What part of the country? Nearly every student that I talk to, at first, they say, okay, I want California. And then if it's not California, well, maybe the Northeast. And then, well, maybe I'll stay here in the Northwest. But I don't think I can do the Midwest. And I definitely can't do the South. Well, I've been to the South a lot in the last few years. And let me tell you, the South has a lot going for it. It's warmer, both temperature-wise and people-wise. The food is great, the music is great, and it's more progressive than you think. So it's much more progressive than you think. It's not like everybody is like the Seattle liberal bubble. No, you're gonna meet people who voted for Trump. But you're going to see a different kind of a balance. And it's the last time when I was in Tennessee in February, I met not one, but two people who had same-sex spouses. And these were things that came up in conversation right at the beginning of the conversation, which I would have thought, maybe 5-10 years ago, that would have been something that people waited to mention until they felt safer. So it's definitely changing in terms of the community, the culture. The nice thing about the South is that the schools can be less expensive, and most of the kids that I work with have a budget. So it can be kind of eye-opening to see what a school in the South could look like. A lot of times students also think they need a prestigious name, and that really is not that important. Some of my most successful kids that I've worked with have gone to schools that you would not have heard of, but they don't show up on any list of the top 10. And they have great experiences there. What really counts is what you do while you're at your school. So if you're not going to think about those questions, how are you going to get started in trying to figure out what college you might want to go to? So you want to think about it from an academic standpoint, a social standpoint, and a financial standpoint. And it's really important to find the Venn diagram of those three things. From an academic standpoint, a lot of times students are really surprised to discover that when they go to college, they get to study anything they want. And they get to take any classes that they want. Nobody's saying you have to take a history class or a math class. In fact, at nearly every school, if you don't want to take math, if there's a quantitative requirement, you can fill it with a philosophy or logic class. So, students are really surprised to find out how much flexibility that they have. A lot of times students don't know what a major is. So let me kind of backtrack a little bit. A major is where you take 10 or 12 classes in one field. But most kids are going to be taking 32 to 36 classes over the course of their 4 years in college. So if you're taking 10 or 12 in your major, you still have 20-some classes to be taking in other things. So you've got lots of flexibility and lots of chances to try things out. So when you're looking at colleges, you want to think about, are you a math science person? Are you interested in engineering, environmental science, nursing, or pre-med? If so, you're going to want a school that's strong in those things. Are you more interested in the humanities, history, international relations, creative writing? Then you want a school in those things. much more hands-on, and you want the kinds of programs that are not necessarily so theoretical, but more practical. Maybe you're interested in graphic design or video game development or criminal justice. You want to think about all of those things when you're thinking about what do you want to study in college. But you also want to think about the social piece. And I think sometimes families are surprised, parents are kind of surprised that I really put a big emphasis on social. Again, like you're only going to have 10 or 12 classes in your major, when you're at college, you're going to be in class for less time than you are in high school in terms of the number of hours of the day that you're in school. And then you might have a work-study job, but then you're going to have a bunch of free time. And you don't want to spend it all sitting in your room watching Netflix or playing video games, because then you're not going to have a very good experience. You're not going to have a rich experience. School's going to feel tedious and dull, and you're going to wish that you were doing something else. So you want to find a school where you can be involved with things. You want to find your things, and it can be anything. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. You know, you could look at what club sports do they have. Is there an outdoors club? Do you want to go skiing, rock climbing, ultimate frisbee? These are all things that Ingram kids are pretty big on. Music, theater, do you want to participate? Do you want to play your instrument in an ensemble? Do you want to be a part of a jazz band? Do you want to put on theater shows? Do you want to be part of a school where you can be involved with theater? Do you want studio art? Do you want to take a ceramics class for your elective so that you can have a chance to kind of let your hair down and get a little bit of stress relief? Do you want to be involved in social justice or student government or LGBTQ plus rights or fraternity or sorority? It really doesn't matter what it is that you do, but you want to be involved with something. Then you also want to think about college cost. And the point of my talk tonight is not about college cost. I'm about college fit and trying to put together the list. But you really have to consider college cost as part of that. So the step one is to find out how much colleges think you can afford. The College Board website has a great calculator that will give you a starting point to let you know a generic one of how much colleges think you can afford. One of the things to remember is that the net price calculator is going to come up with a number that is bigger than most people expect. So as an example, a family earning $100,000 a year might have an EFC of $25,000 a year. The schools do not expect that the family can pay $25,000 out of pocket. What they expect is that there has been $8,000 saved, $8,000 from current income, $8,000 from loans. So that's how they come up with those numbers. Whether or not we agree with those numbers, that's kind of neither here nor there, because the numbers are the numbers. What you need to know is how much colleges think you can afford. If you can afford that, then that's great. Go ahead and look at schools that will be whatever price. But for instance, if you run this number and the college says you can afford $90,000 a year, and you don't think you can afford that much, if you apply to a school that costs $75,000 and doesn't offer merit-based money, they're going to charge you $75,000, so you need to be prepared. The same, likewise, that if it says that you can afford $40,000 a year, but you really think you can't, then you want to find schools that are going to cost less than that, and they can cost less based on merit money and scholarships.
What is EFC?
Expected family contribution.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for asking. So you want to go and find out, you want to start visiting colleges. Some of you who are juniors may have already done this. You don't have to go far to visit colleges. You can see the University of Washington, great example of a big research institution. Seattle U, great example of a medium-sized Jesuit institution. There's a Seattle U in virtually every city in the country. You could go to University of Puget Sound, or what I should have put on here is Pacific Lutheran University, because they are really generous with IB credits, and they love our kids. Good times to go see schools is when schools are in session, though. And some tips for visiting colleges: go to their online calendar and schedule your visit. This gets you in the system. It records your interest. Arrive early. I've gone to see about 200 schools now, and it always takes longer to find parking and make your way to the admissions building than you expect. So just expect that it's going to take a little bit longer. The admissions offices often have coffee and big comfy couches to sit on if you get there 10 or 15 minutes early, and you'll be a lot less stressed. Consider sitting in on a class or having lunch with a student. And a lot of students are kind of reluctant to sit in on classes, but professors are used to having kids do that, and it can be a really helpful way to get an idea of what that school is all about. Pick up a copy of the school newspaper. I think if there's one thing that I would recommend that families do, it's that. That school newspaper is going to tell you what's going on in that campus, warts and all. It's going to, you're going to find out what the hot buttons are, what they're complaining about with the administration, and you're going to find out about what's going on that's really good. And don't be afraid to strike up conversations with current students, because you're going to be really surprised. Some of the best conversations I've had, some of my most memorable college visits, when I think about them, I think about that random student that I talked to who told me about her great senior year project, or who told me about what it was like to go to a small school in Ohio when she was from Southern California. So it's really interesting to talk to students. Research colleges online, and College Board has lots of good information. Naviance has some good information. College Niche and Unigo have student reviews. There's individual college websites that you definitely want to take advantage of, and I'll talk about that in a minute. YouTube has some great programs, some are done by the school itself. They're going to be their fancy marketing materials. Some are done by students. They're kind of bootlegged, and sometimes they're not so interesting, and other times they're really pretty telling about the school. So, to kind of take a look at all of those things. U.S. News and World Reports. Be wary of the rankings. What you should know is that what they're measuring in U.S. News and World Reports almost always is how rich the school is. And it doesn't mean whether or not you're going to have a good experience at that school. So, when you're trying to look at a specific school and try to figure out about the academics, how do you figure out if that might be a good school for you? So, I suggest that you go to their website, you pull up the academics and the list of majors and minors, and it'll give you this long list, and then pick a couple of majors that look interesting to you. Write that down. So keep records when you're doing this. Take a lot of notes when you're doing this research, because you're going to start to see a pattern, and you're going to start to see some schools that are interesting. You're like, oh, I like this about this school, and I like this about that school, and that leads you from one school to another. So write down the majors that look interesting. Click on that major's website. Look at what they say about the major there. Check out the courses that are offered. Do those courses sound interesting? Can you envision yourself taking those classes? And do the same thing for social life. Pull up the school's website, go to their student life link, find the page that lists clubs and organizations, write down the names of all the clubs and organizations that look interesting to you. If you're interested in music or theater, go to their websites and check those out, because oftentimes they won't be in the clubs and organizations, but you can find out what ensembles there are, what theater groups there are that you can be involved with. If you want to participate in club sports, look for that. Figure out, do they have your favorite sport, or are you ready to try something new? For the financial piece, go to the college website, to their financial aid webpage. Look to see if they offer merit scholarships. Make note of any scholarship deadlines, though. A heads up, scholarship deadlines can be earlier than the regular deadlines. So you don't want to apply to a school and find out that if you'd applied 2 weeks earlier, you could have gotten a scholarship. Run the net price calculator for that school if this is a school you're really interested in. So I mentioned earlier, the College Board has a net price calculator. Each school also has its own net price calculator, and you can run that on there. So then the question becomes, all right, this school looks really interesting, but can I get in? And that's hard to say. Whether or not you can get in depends on a whole bunch of factors: grades, test scores, activities, essays. But one thing to use as sort of a touch point to get an idea is go to the College Board Big Future, pull up the profile for that school. And so here's the University of Washington. It shows this pretty picture with the cherry blossoms. This tell you how many students apply, what the percentage of students who get accepted are, etc. Then go over here to SAT, ACT scores. And then put your own SAT and ACT scores in, and you can see right here, you can put in, and I put in just a fake one here, 600 and 600. And you can see that at the University of Washington, if you have 600 on your reading and 600 on your math, you are just below this brown bar. And what is this brown bar? This is the middle 50th percentile. So 25% of the students are down here, 25% are up here, and this shows you that at the University of Washington, with just looking at test scores, this person's gonna have a hard time getting accepted to that school. Now, the University of Washington takes a holistic approach. They look at the rigor, which Ingram with the IB have a lot of rigor possible here. They look at your grades, they look at your activities, they look at your essays, they consider whether or not there are any extenuating circumstances. But if I were talking to a student, I would say, probably based just on this, that the University of Washington would be considered a reach school for this student.
What does that mean?
Reach meaning they not necessarily likely to get in. That they could get in, but it would be unlikely. So a lot of times we'll look at schools from a category of wild card, Stanford, Harvard, I'm looking into you, that's total lottery. Then reach would be a school like this where the student could potentially get accepted, definitely, it's possible, but not that likely. Match school would be a school where if the student had the middle of that bar for test scores, then I'd consider the University of Washington a match. Maybe, maybe not, they would accept this student, but they'd have a decent shot at it. And if the student had sky-high test scores and great grades and great activities and great letters of recommendation, then I would say the University of Washington would be a likely school for that person. But that's all going to depend on the school. So then we look at Willamette University, and here, this same student with the same grades, his 600, or same test scores, his 600 falls right into the middle bar there. So with that 600 at Willamette, this would be a match school. And if his scores were even higher, and it's not all about scores, again, I'm just looking at the scores alone, because you also have to consider grades and activities and everything else. But if the scores were even higher, this school would be considered a likely school for him. And the higher that your scores are in terms of this bar, the more likely you are to get merit scholarship money. So that's one reason that it's helpful to have good test scores. Now, test scores are not the end of the world, because some schools don't require test scores, and Willamette actually is one of those schools that you can apply to without submitting your test scores if you want to. There are a lot of schools like that now, but if you are a strong test taker, you should submit them.
How common or easy is it to find information about schools based on things like IB test scores?
IB test scores are hard to get that information on. It's not really published anywhere that I'm aware of. So usually it's the SAT scores that they look at, or ACT. And make sure that you consider both. Did we talk about that? No, okay. I forgot where I had left off with that with the previous conversation. Just today I heard from one of my students who was so excited. She emailed me and she said, I got a 35 on the ACT, which is the same as a 1540 on the SAT. She said, do I need to retake the SAT, which you've gotten 1400 on? And I said, no, you're done. You can just send in your ACT. No school is going to expect you to send in both the SAT and the ACT. If you score better on one test than the other, that's the test that you should send them. So you want to consider trying out the ACT, maybe doing a mock test, especially if you're a sophomore and haven't had a chance to do a lot of testing yet or test prep. I really recommend for sophomores to do a mock ACT right around now, because during the summer before junior year is when it's a good time to get started on test prep. So then you want to start digging deeper. Once you're starting to find these schools that seem like, okay, this school looks interesting, there's activities there that I could do, there's things I want to study, and it looks like there's some scholarship money. That's when I start going to Unigo, which is student reviews. It's like Yelp, which means that the only people who post are really very happy or very unhappy. But I like to just cut to the chase. And I go here. What's the worst thing about your school and why? This is the one I start with, because I want to know what the negatives are. Every school has some negatives. And then I go to, what do you brag about most when you tell your friends about your school? And guess what? Oftentimes, the things that students consider the worst thing about their school are the same things that people brag about. So the worst thing might be that there are too many parties, but they might brag that there are so many parties. The worst thing might be that the academics are too hard, but they might brag that the academics are challenging. So it gives you an idea of what the school is like. If if the worst thing is the school is pretty deserted on the weekends, well, that might be something that really gives you pause and makes you think, do I want to go away to a school that is going to be deserted on the weekends? That might be a deal breaker for you. But there's also going to be things that people say are the worst thing about the school. Sometimes they say it's the parking. Well, if you're not gonna have a car with you, you don't care. It's always helpful to check that out. Okay, so then you can also dig into different kinds of programs. So for instance, creative writing. At one school, the person was looking for a creative writing major, and they had a creative writing concentration in their English BA, a whole web page devoted to creative writing, lots and lots of classes in poetry, fiction writing, screenwriting, creative nonfiction. Lots of visiting writers came. The school literary magazine and journal was something that students could publish in, and award-winning faculty. Another school that she liked almost as well on every other level, it just didn't have the richness for creative writing. So when it came right down to it and she was trying to weigh the two schools, they seemed pretty similar, but when she dug into the creative writing, then she said, okay, it's really clear to me that school A is the one that's going to be better for me. And another example of this would be with environmental science. Sometimes environmental science can be very sciencey, and sometimes it can be part of environmental studies, which can be much more humanities-based, not quite as sciencey. So this student was looking at one school where he could get a BS in environmental science, and they had also environmental ethics and policy available at that school, so they had a richness of environmental programs. The other school had a BA in environmental studies, and they had a few things that were going on, but the students were told right on the website that they encouraged them to double major in something else, because they didn't really feel like the program was as strong as it could be, was basically the thing. Okay, so yes, you want to go to an affordable school. Scholarships, the best ones come from the schools themselves, and I'm gonna cut this a little bit short here. The WUI, Western Undergraduate Exchange, this can be a great way to find some more affordable schools in the West, which our definition of West goes all the way over to Colorado and down to New Mexico. Some other state schools that also offer some really great deals. University of Maine charges students whatever their state flagship charges. University of Vermont has some great scholarships. University of South Carolina, I have a student who's going to start there in the fall, and she's going to be paying less than she would have to go to the University of Washington, and she's thrilled. It has all the programs she's looking for. She's really excited to have a chance to go live in the South. Miami University of Ohio, University of Alabama, lots of other colleges have, lots of other state schools have merit-based scholarships. In private schools, look for the ones that mention merit-based scholarships on their websites, and then also look for additional scholarships for music, art, or leadership. Some schools will offer scholarships to our kids because we're coming from far away, and then again, watch for deadlines. Many schools offer their best scholarships to the kids who apply early. For information about books, I like the FISC guide. I also like the College Solution, which is Lynn O'Shaughnessy's excellent book about finding the right school at the right price. And she also has a great website with lots of good information So, that's it. Questions? No questions? You guys are so quiet. I kind of raced through a bunch of it at the end because I wanted to make sure we had some time. Yes?
Are you still taking clients?
Yes, I am.
Okay, that's good to know. Do you have a card?
I do. It's up here. You can come up and get one.
Thank you.
Right. Any other? Yes?
What do you recommend for a student who has no idea what they want to study or?
You know, they actually know more than they think they know. But I usually have kids start by doing a career and personality survey, and that gets them thinking. It might not be, it's not going to be that exact, but they kind of know whether they want science classes or history classes. You know, they'll have a ballpark idea. And then you just kind of keep digging. But it's perfectly okay not to know what you want to study. I just like kids to try and find a school that's going to have classes they want to take. Yes, question?
Where could I find one of these career and personality surveys? Would they be online or?
Yes, there are some online, and Naviance has one on it too, so you can check on Naviance. There's quite a few of them out there, but I think the Naviance one is pretty good. And I'd definitely recommend that you do that. It's good to, the more you know about yourself, the easier this is. Yes?
What's a reasonable number of schools to apply to?
Oh, that's such a great question. It really depends on a lot of factors. But kind of the conventional wisdom is that you would do 3 likely schools, 3 match schools, and 3 reach schools. But I shake that up a lot because if you're applying to some of those wild card schools like Stanford or Yale, then they almost don't even count, and so kids might apply to 12 schools if they're applying to some of those schools because they still want to make sure they have a good solid list. The kids who are looking for scholarship money apply to the most schools. The girl who's going to South Carolina, I think she applied to about 11 schools, and because she wanted to see what, where she could get a good deal, the money was really important to her. But some kids only apply to 3 schools, or not even that many. Some kids apply to 1 school, early decision, they get in and they're done. So it just depends.
During admissions, do schools look at how many colleges you're applying to or what
No,
other colleges?
they don't know. They don't know which colleges you're applying to. They used to ask that, and they're not really allowed to ask that anymore. And they used to have a way to find out through the FAFSA what colleges you were applying to, but they can't do that. And if you're ever doing an interview and somebody asks you what colleges you're applying to, that's when it comes up now, and it shouldn't come up in an interview, but the person might not have been trained properly. So the best answer is to give them other schools that are in that same category. So let's say you're interviewing for Reed College, which is a small liberal arts college in Portland. Then you might say, I'm looking at other small liberal arts colleges, so that they know that you have, like, that you're looking just at a category of schools. That might not be completely true, but they're not supposed to ask you that anyway. But you don't need to answer it. And there's ways to kind of get around it. Other questions? Yes.
I noticed you had Canada on your map. Do you also give advice about applying outside?
I do, yes. And in fact, Canadian schools are really popular around here. Couple of things to remember. They're not that same sense of rah-rah that we have here. In fact, one of my students is at University of Victoria, and she just got home, and I had a chance to see her a couple days ago. And she said that she went to one of their games, and there were about, she said, 3 people there. Obviously more than that. But it's not that sense of school spirit. You don't go to the game to cheer on your team. It's more, it's a little more focused on the academics and co-op, getting work experience as part of the opportunity there. But a lot of kids like to go to Canadian schools. Yeah.
What if you're applying to a college based on sports or sports that you'd like to do?
Yeah, that ends up being tricky. So I'm going to answer that question by also kind of expanding on the same question that you just asked about Canadian schools, because also I often have kids interested in UK schools, which can be a really good way to go. And you're asking about sports, so funny enough, in the previous session, one of the women here she has an older son that I had worked with, but I hadn't found out where he was going to go to school. The last I had known, he had been looking at a school, small liberal arts college on the East Coast that had been recruiting him for his sport, and I kind of assumed that that's where he had gone. A lot of times students don't keep in touch with me that well after they make their decisions. Anyway, his mom said no, he had ended up going to a school in the UK to play his sport, and it had worked out really well for him. But what happens when you're looking to be recruited is it's a little trickier to try and find that right combination of schools that are what you're looking for from an academic and social standpoint and from the sports standpoint. So you don't want to go to a school that maybe is a really bad cultural fit. I'm just gonna pull something out of the air, like maybe a small fundamentalist Christian school in a part of the country that you really don't like. That would maybe not be a good fit for a student who wasn't interested in that. So you want to make sure that you have the other pieces fit, which makes it a little trickier. So when you're approaching coaches, you want it to be coaches from schools that you would like to go to. Other questions?
Is there an advantage to the early acceptance?
Yes, there's a huge advantage to early
What
acceptance.
would that be?
What's that?
Can you expand upon that?
Yeah. So there's two kinds of early. There's early decision, which is binding. You say, if you take me, I will come. And then there is early action, which is not binding, and there's no downside to early action whatsoever. If a school offers early action, you should by all means apply early action, because some schools can say that since they offer early action, they're going to give their best scholarships to the kids who apply early action. Some schools that are competitive schools to get into really will only consider you if you apply early action. Tulane and Colorado College both, right up front, will say, if you don't know that you like us well enough to make our early deadline, then we're probably not going to accept you. And they can make that decision. So there's really no downside to applying early action. Early decision is trickier because then you're committing to that school. You can get out of it if the financial aid isn't right, but other than that, you're really bound to go to that school. But there's a lot of pros to that too, so I don't want to make it sound like it's all negative. As far as statistically, it could be the difference between, I was just looking at this and I'm going to talk about it in the next session. At Northwestern, 27% were accepted early decision and 9% regular decision. So it can be a big difference at some schools. Other questions?
When does that normally take place? Early decision, early action?
You apply November 1 or November 15 and you hear back December 15. And there are a few exceptions to that, but in general. I have a handout here if anybody wants one, which has a list of some of the things that we had talked about today and also some other things on here. And I think that's it. We must be, I guess we just got 5 more minutes, is that right?
Probably just 2, and we can no longer do the overhead announcements because of the drama thing, so.
Oh, great.
8:15 is our cutoff here.
Okay, so we're right on time. If anybody wants a handout, you can have some cards if anybody wants.